Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio, and this is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. Now, we're broadcasting on the 24th is the first day this program is going to be heard, but we're taping it on Friday, August 23rd, in the midst of confused alarms of impending war. So, as usual, it's time to mobilize, and the vehicle is clear. We're going to be at the mall tomorrow, many of us, for the anniversary of the Martin Luther King I Have a Dream March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And that was, of course, in 1963. This is the approximate anniversary. There's the march today, tomorrow, that is Saturday, the 24th of August, but there's also one then on the following Wednesday, I think the 28th, which is the actual calendar day-to-day anniversary. So the United Front Against Austerity hereby invites all members, friends, persons of goodwill to assemble on the mall at about 9 to 9:30 a.m., at the Smithsonian. It's right by the Smithsonian Castle, the Smithsonian Metro stop. And this would be at 9 o'clock, 9:30 in the morning. And we're there for the event sponsored by Congressman John Conyers, in many ways the dean of the Black Caucus, someone who has been serving the Detroit area in Congress, fighting the good fight since 1964 when he was elected and 1965 when he was sworn in. And this is more than just backward looking. This is very, very current because Conyers is the sponsor of H.R. 1000. This is a bill which gives a 0.25% Wall Street sales tax on stock transactions, a 1/50th 2/100ths, so 1/50th of 1% on the derivatives tax, and this money goes into two trust funds, one for jobs, one for job training, and it is targeted at people who need to develop skills and need to be included in the labor force, Indian reservations, inner city, unemployed, but also municipal workers and others. It is altogether a very positive step in the right direction along the road to the Wall Street sales tax. So we're for it. Again, let us not make the perfect the enemy of the good. Here's something good. Perfect is a 1% across the board Wall Street sales tax divided between the feds and the states. This clearly goes in that direction. And if you're not a sectarian, you've got to be in favor of what goes in the right direction, as long as it embodies the principle in a visible form, which in this case it does. It taxes Wall Street turnover. Once that's enacted, then obviously people will look at that flow and say, why are we only taking 0.25% when the average person is paying 7, 8, 9% sales tax? So there we go. On the mall, 9:30 a.m. for the Martin Luther King commemoration. Now, the danger of war here in the short term. This is the big issue today. So we're calling on people to mobilize. If you're coming to the mall today, bring your hands off Syria. Don't attack. And we want to give friendly advice to Obama right at the very beginning. Dear Obama, you seem conflicted. You better stay conflicted, because if you go for this project, you will be impeached. The same McCain who demands an attack will vote to impeach you, and you'll see it if you go down this road. And the Republicans, the national security warmonger Republicans, the duck and cover style Republicans, Duncan Hunter of the military budget out there in California, those guys, they will impeach you if you destroy your base. Remember that the Republicans have learned something. They realized that if they had waited to impeach Clinton until after the bombing of Yugoslavia, that they might well have been able to do it because he alienated his base, turned them off, cooled them down to a significant degree. So they don't want to try to impeach Obama yet if they think they can destroy his base and then turn around and impeach him. So the only appeal to Obama that has traction, I know, is his self-interest, not national self-interest, not humanity, none of this. Forget about that with Obama. But Obama, it's bad for you. It's bad for your tenure in office. You will be impeached if you do this. I guarantee you. There's nothing I can do, but the people who can do it will do it to you. Now, here's what we have. On Wednesday morning, if you woke up listening to National Pentagon Radio, you heard the first item was big gas attack in Syria, big sarin gas attack in the suburbs of Damascus. These are the eastern suburbs of Damascus. It's a place called Ghut. And the source of this, there's only one source. Activists say. Activists say. We're in the land, not of Dr. Goebbels or of, the Neue Weltbühne of Willy Münzenberg, other propagandists. We're in the land of activists say, and that means Western intelligence agencies have invented. CIA Langley, speaking through some useful idiot, says. That's what this comes down to. So we don't know anything, but what we do know is that the warmonger crowd is in high dudgeon. They seem to think that this is their last chance, and they may be right. This may be it before the end of the military campaigning season and the definitive collapse, weakening, marginalization of the death squads. So the source is only the opposition. Obama has given an interview to CNN. And in this, again, he's conflicted. And again, he better stay that way. He says this is a big event of grave concern that requires the attention of the United States and of the international community. It probably requires action by the United Nations. Now, of course, that means UN action means exactly what you will not get as long as Russia and China hang tough and stick to their principled positions and don't throw their own vital interests away. Then there will be no UN action on this. Obama says the time frame for action is growing short. This is action on Syria is growing short. He wants the United Nations to investigate it, but he stresses that the United States cannot do this alone, and it's time for the UN Security Council to do something. He talks about the need to think before you strike, think before you attack. All in all, not a warlike statement. In other words, it's somewhat lukewarm. It has dangerous elements in it, to be sure, but the overall tenor of this indicates that there's plenty of room to mobilize. In other words, if you think that this decision to attack Syria has already been made, yes, again, it has not been. So get out there and don't complain later. If you get into a war with Syria and a world war, which is the likely result, or if you care about some country in the region, a lot of them are going to go down, then you better do something about this. You better get on Twitter. You better get the proverbial horn and get your congressman and tell them, no, no, no. We'll talk about the broad opposition to this in just a minute. Now, even more important in some ways is the letter we have here from General Dempsey responding to a warmonger call from one of the congressional warmongers, Elliot Engel, and we'll get to that in just a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Time to mobilize, hands off Syria, no war. And you can throw yourself into this with some idea that there is a possibility, I think, of heading this off. Obama says you don't just jump in, you have to think before you attack. So for the moment, there's no attack. There's supposed to be an investigation. Now, let's look at this other document. General Martin Dempsey, head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in the process of getting a second 2-year term. Letter to Representative Elliot Engel. Engel, a leftist warmonger. This is someone obviously very concerned about Israel and so forth. So he wants an attack. Dempsey, who I regard as Obama's general at this point, he's tied his fortunes to Obama. If Obama goes down, so will Dempsey. This is the only kind of motivation we have in Washington these days, patriotism and humanitarianism out of style, but personal interest always there. So Engel has suggested in his letter that the U.S. military is reticent, weary, and risk-averse. And he says, no, says Dempsey, we're experienced in complex conflict, realistic about the cost we incur in blood and treasure when we apply the military instrument of national power. We are pragmatic about the limits of military force. He says, I was asked at the Senate Armed Services Committee what it would take to tip the balance in favor of the opposition and get Assad out of power. And the answer is there's not much you can do. There are certainly actions you can take to tip the cost, to tip the balance in favor of one or the other. He says, we can destroy the Syrian Air Force. Yeah, you can destroy it, Dempsey, but at what cost to you? Will all the sorties come back? That's an interesting question. The loss of Assad's Air Force would negate his ability to attack opposition forces, but it would also escalate and potentially further commit the United States to the conflict. Stated in another way, says Dempsey to Engel, it would not be militarily decisive, but it would commit the United States decisively to the conflict. In other words, you'd be in the quagmire. In a variety of ways, the use of U.S. military force can change the military balance, but it cannot resolve the underlying and historic ethnic, religious, and tribal issues that are fueling this conflict. It's not two sides. There are many sides. And there is no side that represents U.S. interests. Many factions, violent struggles will go on. Well, that's what he's saying. Any argument to say no, I guess, is a good argument. We won't be too punctilious about that. Neighbors are concerned about the spillover effects. We can do something about the humanitarian side and so forth. Now, interesting enough, in this letter, there is no mention of Obama. He doesn't say, I agree with Obama or Obama anything. There is no Obama in here. Engel presumably asked him, what's your military opinion? And he's telling you what the military opinion is. Read this together with the letter to Levin of the Senate Armed Services Committee back in July, where Dempsey essentially gave you a menu of options and the costs, although the costs were all underestimated because he didn't figure that an aircraft carrier might go to Davy Jones' locker, or airplanes may not come back from their missions, and what it costs to train pilots, and the long-term costs of medical care, and all the rest, okay? So it looks like there's a significant anti-war faction in the U.S. government. So I say to people, if you spent the summer attacking Obama, you're a fool. You should have been attacking the warmongers. Here's the warmongers. Let's talk about them. Here's the ones you should attack. Laurent Fabius, the French foreign minister, ready to fight to the last American. This Vichyssoise, this unreconstructed colonel of Suez, he wants the use of force. He is the most bellicose, knowing that it's going to be American inner-city poor and Appalachian poor who die on the beach if it comes to that. This British Colonel Blimp, Hague, the one who obviously loves to hear the sound of his own voice, is also pontificating. And then we have the dumb cow, Baroness Ashton of the European Union foreign operation. We just heard on France 24 that she is so dumb that she had to do her hearings to get the current job. She had to do them twice. She blew the first round, so she had to come back for another round. And the megalomaniac Davutoglu of Turkey, who says, oh, all red lines have been crossed. What are you waiting for? Get in there and pull our chestnuts out of the fire. How about that? The media, the U.S. media, our dear friends, Amy Goodman, the bloodsucker. We're told that WBAI has $4 million of debt, and it's going under. It's going down. It's going to cease to exist after all these years, right, since 1950. Amy Goodman is owed $2 million of that money. She says, no, I want my pound of flesh. So she wants her pound of flesh from WBAI, and she wants more than a pound of flesh. She's for humanitarian intervention. We get the picture. Jonathan Karl of ABC News. You know, in Middle English, Karl means a churl, a churl. So the churlish Jonathan Karl, in his interview with Obama, practically he baits him and interrupts him. Well, you know, you didn't intervene, a red line, this and all this other stuff. Basically trying to goad Obama, right? Get his goat and do something about it. The State Department with Mademoiselle Pesky, we'll have to see about that. They seem to be divided. Let's just take another sample of opinion. Here's an interesting example. The Washington Times, right? The reactionary neocon Tea Party right-wing newspaper here in Washington. Their columnist Thomas Mullen. So this is starting from the Dempsey letter to Engel, and it's time to take a serious look at just who has misled the American people. For 12 years, neoconservatives and other war hawks have presented military intervention in the Middle East as the only way to fight terrorism, bring stability to the Middle East, and champion democratic values. 12 years of active war have failed to achieve any of these goals, have not advanced U.S. interest, even if that were a justifiable cause for war. So the Iraq, a nation in chaos, infrastructure razed, 2 million refugees, Christian community destroyed, and government friendly to Iran. Right? What benefit? His idea is it's time to take a serious look at the entire 12-year adventure in the Middle East, in particular, this interventionism. How much money are you willing to borrow? What evidence is there that you've accomplished anything? And how will next year be different? And how much of this can you pay for? Now, the guy's not a distinguished thinker, but interesting that the reactionary Washington Times, usually part of the warmonger chorus in past years, right, with Mad Dog Bush the Younger, now they've turned against it. I also have to point out Barbara Slavin on National Pentagon Radio. We'll get her in just a minute. She was warmongering this morning, and, of course, for humanitarian reasons. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So here we have a top Pentagon general, Dempsey, basically says no, and this is really no. It's no under any circumstances, as far as I can see. Obama, obviously, somewhat more evasive. Here's an interesting fact about Obama, though. The warmongers are complaining this morning that the last fake chemical attack, remember? Obama, this was sort of in around mid-June after the fall of Qusair. Obama had not said it himself, but they sent out little Ben Rhodes to say that the U.S. would now start arming the rebels. According to a number of people on the blabs this morning, no weapons on this shipment, anyway, have come to the rebels. None. There's an argument that the U.S. has been arming them all along, and that this is only to legalize what has been now the practice. But in that case, they've legalized it, but they haven't increased the deliveries. There seems to be a lot of complaining that almost nothing has been delivered. So did Obama bamboozle the warmongers? And again, Obama says, I'm against war. War is bad for Obama. That's how Obama comes at it. But that may not be absolutely the worst under these conditions. In other words, that's something you can work with if you're not a fool. If you didn't spend your time joining in the Republican Ted Cruz, Rand Paul attack on Obama, right? The Snowden snow job designed to weaken Obama to the point where he wouldn't be able to say no. Look at it that way. If he's able to say no now, it would be no thanks to a lot of these jerks who have been bashing Obama based on, I don't know what, Benghazi or some idiotic story like this. Barbara Slavin on National Pentagon Radio of the Atlantic Council and something called Al Monitor, some kind of propaganda instrument for the Arab world. She's against land war, she says. She's shocked to be called a warmonger, as she was this morning. Oh, she was against the war in Iraq, but now it's humanitarian. So she says there are sometimes when you've got to stop thinking and start acting, right? A somewhat Nietzschean proposition. So we've got this entire parade. Here's another very interesting one. On public television, we have Margaret Warner, right, the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour, or whatever they call it now, the NewsHour. She comes on there, and she's harping on the moral duty to attack. You have humanitarian moral duties to wage war. You've got to get in there and attack. The warmonger is a guy called Zarate, who calls for the bombing. It's clear that Zarate is not going, and Zarate's kids are not going, but the Appalachian and inner city people are supposed to go. And indeed, Zarate whines that Obama should be hyping war. We need strong leadership, says Zarate. Obama, get out there and hype the war. You're not doing it. Syria, according to him, must big interest for the U.S. to come in. Then we have a mixed character, Joshua Landis of the University of Oklahoma. His line is, Syria's already a failed state, but in Syria, the United States has no partner, no ally. You've got the Islamists, you've got the others, and he wants to make this comparison that in the American Civil War, you have 750,000 dead out of about 30 million. In Syria today, 100,000 dead out of about 27 million. Syria is still far short of a real heavy-duty civil war. And then he goes back and says, would it have been better for the British and French to intervene in the American Civil War? He says, it probably would have been better at the time, but over the long run, it would not have been better. That's a tortured argument. We have the solution. Thank you to the Russian fleet for not allowing this horrible thing to happen. And that brings us to the Russian Foreign Ministry. Hats off to the Russian Foreign Ministry for hanging tough and for coming out early in the process. The Russian line is, in my opinion, the most factual, and it says that this entire stunt, this entire accusation, activists say, this entire activists say proposition was a pre-planned provocation, a provocation pre-planned by the rebel groups, not specific whether it's the Nusra al-Qaeda gang or whether it's the CIA Idris Free Syrian Army, but they are the ones. Notice also the Israelis are hyping war. We've got this entire lineup, Fabius, Hague, Ashton, the Turks, and the Israelis. They all want the attack. The Israelis say that Syrian rockets were used to carry chemical weapons. I think this means Grad, short-range missiles of old Warsaw Pact vintage, but we'll see. Again, to Obama, this would be political suicide. You should not do this under any circumstances. And if you think this is theoretical, we have a couple of lunatic Republican members of the House of Representatives. They're lost in obscurity, but there were two of them, at least this week, talking about impeachment in their town hall meetings, often in response to questions. Senator Coburn of Oklahoma, fanatic fascisto Republican, says that Obama is now close to the borderline of impeachment. So if Obama needs any reminder of what awaits him if he destroys his own base with a war, this should remind him. And the only way to get that across, though, is you've got to bash Obama mercilessly on this war point. In other words, we're not interested in other issues right now. Right now, for the next couple of weeks and months, it's got to be hands off Syria, and if not, you are in big trouble. Now, the Figaro of France, conservative newspaper, largest right-wing paper, They claim that there is a reason for the gas attack, which they claim. We reject the gas attack, at least by Assad. They say, why would Assad carry out a gas attack when the UN inspectors are in Damascus? And Figaro, they develop an argument that there are training camps for very capable guerrillas, right, practically supermen, because they've been trained by the U.S., the Israelis, the Jordanians at camps, and that the first spearhead, the first fighting force of these super-duper guerrillas is being sent in. 300 of them have been sent in through the area of Deraa. So they say there's an attack going on from Deraa in the direction of Damascus, and that the Syrians, and that this has been going on for weeks. It's amazing. We haven't noticed it, that the attack on, the supposed attack, the alleged attack, the big lie attack here, the fake gas attack, that is supposedly the desperate response of the Syrian regime to this formidable spearhead, right, this unstoppable force of 300 trained guerrillas, accompanied by U.S., Israeli, Jordanian, and other commandos. Now, there was a meeting at the White House on Thursday. This is probably the National Security Council. Watch out for the snake, Susan Rice. She is open to anything evil, but especially to humanitarian intervention in a case like this. Watch out for Samantha Power at the United Nations. A lot of these people are demanding, the warmongers are going with a kind of minimalist program. They want a cruise missile strike. This would be something like Clinton around Christmas time, 1998, in the throes of impeachment. He did a one-shot cruise missile attack that included Sudan, it included Afghanistan, and so forth. They would like to at least attack some Syrian unit, claiming that this was the one that fired the chemical shots. Again, there's a substantial anti-war party mobilized. Back in a minute. Welcome back to the World Crisis Radio, and now we want to switch over to the active side of things, the magnificent effort in New York City to get the Tax Wall Street Party on the November ballot, and the various developments that go with this. And we've got to remember this has been a very big week, going back to Tuesday when the signatures were turned in, and we're now at the point where the window of opportunity for the reactionary forces to try to stop the Tax Wall Street Party from getting on the ballot, that window is closing. So let's get all of the most recent updates from Daniela Wall.
Webster, a few hours. Well, you said a few days ago, this last Tuesday. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
You're on the air.
This last Tuesday, August 20th, members of the Tax Wall Street Party and members of the United Front Against Austerity escorted mayoral candidate Randy Credico into the New York Board of Elections office at 42 Broadway to deliver almost 10,000 signatures. Our minimum signature requirement for ballot status was 3,750 valid signatures from registered New York City voters, and in just 24 days, our team submitted almost 10,000. If there are no objections, meaning challenges, by 5 p.m. today, Friday, August 23rd, then Tax Wall Street Party is on the ballot.
Okay, and of course, go if you're hearing this on Saturday, right, which is when the program is aired, go immediately to the credico2013.org website, and you will get there, hopefully, the confirmation that the window of challenge has closed and that Credico Tax Wall Street is on the ballot, giving us 2 months to educate New Yorkers and others, because when you're in New York, right, the communications are all there, on the necessity of taxing Wall Street turnover.
Yeah, at 5 p.m. today, I will post onto the website that we made the ballot and make a press release. So hopefully everyone will see this message when the show airs tomorrow on the website at taxwallstreetparty.org. So
a couple of questions. Where did a lot of these signatures come from? I mean, were there some places that were more eager than others?
This was a heroic effort by the Tax Wall Street Party party supporters, many coming from the United Front Against Austerity. You can find them at againstausterity.org. Civil rights groups came forward, economic rights groups, and your heroic listeners who stepped up. We even got a brief shout-out of support from the AFL-CIO for our campaign. So that's where the volunteers came from, Webster.
Okay, and I want to take a moment and just thank everybody, all of the listeners to this program who stepped up, and we know that quite a few did in order to make this possible, because, of course, the logistics are absolutely critical. And if this occurs, this is going to put the tax Wall Street issue on the front burner, and that will be to no small degree the merit of people listening who sent in their checks. Right, a lot of small contributions came in from people who were obviously listeners. Yeah,
we got a lot of small donations that ended up adding up to thousands of dollars, which was what made this happen. That was what pushed us over the top. So thank you to everybody who ended up donating. It was amazing. That's what really did it.
Now let's cross our fingers. We don't want to tempt fate. We don't want to show too much hubris, but let's cross our fingers. Figure that Credico and Tax Wall Street will be on the ballot all the way to November 5th, beyond the September 10th Democratic primary. Tell us about the campaign now, right? We're still in the Democratic primary phase, September 10th.
Now that it appears, and I'm still very nervous, this is the most nerve-wracking of all times, these last few hours to wait, and I don't know why. It's like just that last foot before the finish line. But now that it appears that we qualified for the ballot, we're still going to need everybody's help, especially now. Our greatest need is still contributions as we're transitioning into the campaign phase. So whatever people can donate will be deeply appreciated and used frugally.
Suppose you convince somebody. What should they do? Where do they go to contribute?
You can donate to credico2013.org/donate, or there is an easy-to-find donate button on the homepage of Randy's website at credico2013.org, credico2013.org. You can also donate to the Tax Wall Street Party. There's a donate button on that site at taxwallstreetparty.org. And we also, since we don't have a lot of money, we're going to need to get a lot of creativity. We're going to need a lot of creativity. So if anybody has any cool ideas or suggestions, please contact me at taxwallstreetparty@gmail. If you are a singer-songwriter, we need Tax Wall Street Party song. If you are a video editor, we need videos and commercials, humorous videos and poignant videos. If you are a website person or graphic artist, we need graphic memes. If you are a lawyer, we are going to need lots of lawyers. We need people to post and repost our memes and commercials on Facebook and Twitter. We need people to print Tax Wall Street material to bring to their own local protests and town hall meetings to spread the word about the 1% Wall Street sales tax and nationalizing the Federal Reserve. In other words, we need people to be self-starters, and we need people to be self-starters in their own neighborhoods. We want volunteers in New York City to get out and stump with us in the subways. You can come meet up with us in Times Square and Rockefeller Center to get on shows like Good Morning America and Fox and Friends. We will be holding big Tax Wall Street signs, vote Credico signs, nationalize the Fed signs outside the windows of those shows to get the message on TV. So I'm gonna make a calendar of events on the website and tell you what days we're gonna end up being in New York City outside the windows of those shows. But come join us, and this has been a lot of fun so far. So coming out will be fun.
Let me also add, as far as I know, that we did have some nationwide help, obviously so far, but now you're in the phase where if you want to come and agitate, think about doing that, right? Our ability to accommodate people is limited, but still think about spending a week in New York sometime between now and November 5th.
Yeah, it would be a great vacation if you guys came to New York and did this with us. And you wouldn't regret it because I don't know. A lot of people who have already come found it really fun and meaningful. People can also start their own affiliate Tax Wall Street parties in their own states. And if you want to email me about that, we can discuss what's required for obtaining ballot status at taxwallstreetparty@gmail. But everyone is welcome, left, right, and center. This is an American party. We are not ideological. We are only focused on the financial oligarchy that has sucked the life out of this country for the last 40 years. So, and when the show airs, it's going to be the March on Washington, Webster, right?
That's right.
So you're going to be there, and I think there's never been a better time for the March on Washington, because not only focused on civil rights and economic rights, but there's never been a better time for the Tax Wall Street Party. We are in a depression, and U.S. income inequality is the highest in the developed world. The Tax Wall Street Party is a recovery movement. We're offering practical solutions for an economic recovery. You can read our program at taxwallstreetparty.org. And once again, thank you to everybody who helped us get on the ballot in New York City. And if we can make it there, we can make it anywhere. That's my message.
Now listen, let's just point out the influence that Credico has already had, which I think I detect. This past week, we had the New York One debate. New York One is a local cable station. It's like, I don't know, News Channel 8 here in Washington is the similar thing. But New York One, okay. So New York One, it's amazing. 7 dwarves. They get 7 mayoral candidates. I really wonder how they justify excluding Credico, because they had a guy up there, Salgado, who's a Pentecostal minister, who's not an elected official. Right? A lot of them are elected or were elected officials, but they got 7 dwarves up there and not Credico. I think that's something we really have to look into. And
I think their tactic is just to ignore us instead of trying to fight us, because they just do not want any attention on the Tax Wall Street Party.
That goes without saying, but I think we've got to actually make an inquiry about that. How dare you? And what's your basis? What's your argument on the basis of what?
I'm going to spend the day looking into that.
We'll be back in we've got to have our top of the hour break now. So we've got a couple of minutes of ideology coming up, I guess. But we'll be back in a minute with Daniela Wall. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio, and we're going to continue now with our report on the progress towards ballot status of the Tax Wall Street Party. There used to be Occupy Wall Street. That's so passé. Now it's tax them, hit them hard. Don't just occupy them. But listen, here's what I wanted to say. See what you think of this. There was this New York One debate. Okay. With the 7 dwarves, right? Credico excluded, and therefore the whole thing a pretty sorry, sad, low-energy affair. But here's what I noticed. Wiener, in order to detract attention from his well-known sociopathic tendencies, Wiener is now in favor of single-payer health care. In other words, Medicare for all for everybody in New York City. That is a demand lifted directly from the Credico program. I have here the famous King Kong folder of the Credico campaign, right? This was available already in May. Randy Credico, New York City. This is 19 promises to New Yorkers. Single-payer health care is on there. Wiener was nowhere on that issue. Now he's on it. Another one, Thompson. He wants a people's budget. Not so clear what the people's budget is. You can see he's trying to get some populist economic traction. The most interesting, de Blasio. De Blasio has a pre-K tax. It's pre-kindergarten. So he's claiming that if he puts a 4% or so tax on incomes over $500,000, so it's a surtax over $500,000, that would allow everybody to have preschool. And he also says 200,000 low-income housing units over 10 years, right, which sort of dilutes it down to 20K units. But what I see is the pull of the outspoken populist economics, which are associated with Credico, right, in these pamphlets that I know you helped to put together.
Yeah, we noticed that too, and we didn't want to be paranoid, but now it's starting to get very weird. They're just they're taking direct program points that they were nowhere on. These people were nowhere even close to any of these issues, or there was none of this, like you said, like this populist insurgency type stuff. So it's almost coming into fashion, and maybe we help start that fashion. And that's
I think so. And again, this is exactly what you want to do. This is another way to argue. Look, with Credico, it's not just pie in the sky, vote for me, and then after I'm elected, you'll get these and these benefits. It's support me now, get in there and fight for me, and the benefits will come rather soon. Because this again, it's a very important change in the climate. I think De Blasio, if he is ahead of some of these others, which he may be, it's because of this pre-K tax that allows him to sound like Credico in the sense of he's saying, what most people would hear, tax Wall Street, well, tax rich people. It's obviously not that simple, but you get the idea. They're trying to do a bait and switch, in other words.
Well, the thing that worries me is, are they just taking the message right now to be in vogue and then get elected? And once they're elected, not really follow any of it.
Of course.
I know.
But still,
I know. So,
you're moving the needle, right? You're not just a voice crying in the wilderness. You're pushing the whole debate in a given direction. And these things then can take on a life of their own.
I wasn't at the New York One debate, and a good thing to do, Webster, would be to actually ask the guys on the ground that were there. But they did tell me that there was, I heard some little tidbits that there was an unusual amount of pandemonium outside that New York debate. And it looked very weird. I don't know if it was set up by the campaigns to look that way or it was actually organic. But I heard that it was like gang warfare on the ground. There were the paid pro-Quinn sign-holding people being fought right next to them by Quinn protesters. And then right next to that were the de Blasio hired sign holders with a band. And then right next to that was the de Blasio, the two-faced puppet of Wall Street signs. And it went like that down the line, and there were actual physical fights throughout this. And Randy was outside preaching to the crowd because he was the only candidate not allowed inside. So he was holding court outside, and there were some big pictures of him, yelling to the crowd in the Gothamist online magazine, and it's kind of getting wild because there's an awakening. People are seeing through these marketed candidates and this double talk, like we were saying in the other episode. People are not as ignorant about this stuff as they used to be, because the protesters are out against these candidates, and nobody's, thrilled with any of them. Even when they try to manufacture a populist insurgent like de Blasio, like when Soros goes out of his way to do his manufacturing movie that he does, people aren't really that thrilled or buying it anymore. Not like they were when he did it with Obama. It's not. They're trying to say, "Oh, this is the next Obama," and same thing, and it does not feel like that on the ground.
No, of course not. But look, here's the benefit we're giving the public now, is that you can bet your bottom dollar now. Every time they have one of these fake debates, Credico will be outside. We need to get some more people with him, right? And so forth. But on the inside, my impression is what's his name? Weiner is the slickest because he's been to Washington, right? He looks more like a candidate. De Blasio, his program points are more carefully based on bait and switch because he's got the Soros money and the Soros consultants. The one who stood out, I think, is Quinn. She is just pathetic. She is just she looks to me like the student government candidate back in your sophomore year in high school. She's just out of her element.
But just grown up like a weird morph of a person. They're all pretty repulsive. There was this other, I think, I don't remember. I think it was the New York Times had the kind of a squares of the thumbnails of the candidates' heads, and of course Randy was the only one who was excluded from that as well. But there was something so weird. I've never seen like an uglier, more repulsive group of people. And maybe I don't know. There's got to come up. And I see somebody saying, "Well, where do they find these people?" And it's like for you to get into public office and sell out humanity and just do the bidding of the people who don't have the public interest
of Wall Street, right? Of Bloomberg if you're Quinn, and of Soros if you're de Blasio.
To do Wall Street's bidding, that's why you're hired. You're hired to do Wall Street's bidding, and to find those kind of people, you're going to find people that are soulless. They all had dead shark eyes. At least Randy has some humanity in his face.
We have Liu, who apparently has all kinds of fundraising scandals. Thompson, who again does not stand out. Anyway, the point is, if you want a protest candidate, because many people are looking for that, right? Credico gives you the biggest bang for the buck. because he's even given you positive elements. So you're not just protesting the political establishment. That's fairly common. But you're actually protesting Wall Street, who control the political establishment, who hire and fire these throwaway candidates that you see. So Credico gives you program, obviously, and if you're just looking for a protest, he's also the best protest candidate. So
yeah,
I think people should really look at this.
There are going to be two chances to vote for Randy in the September 10th Democratic primary and in the November 5th general election now under the Tax Wall Street Party. So don't go with voter fatigue and voter apathy. Like you said, all that stuff is just passé. Go with a protest vote now. And Randy is the biggest bang for your buck of any other candidate. If you are going to cast a protest vote, just do it. Don't be disillusioned by the system. Help us change the system.
Right, and if you don't do it, don't come complaining when the place goes to hell. And
exactly.
And they start, they introduce, I don't know what, indentured servitude if you don't pay your pre-K tax or whatever it is. So
yeah. The battle lines are have been drawn. Protect Wall Street or protect your country. Protect Wall Street or protect your city. Protect yourself.
Okay, Danielle, we got to run now. I think we've given the place to go.
Okay.
Credico2013.org, Credico2013.org. You get everything there. You can contribute, volunteer, and we'll be back, obviously, next week with more updates on this. But we'll be back right now in just a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Just one program point, right? Wiener, in order to somehow cloak his lack of program, let us say, he talks about single payer. It means Medicare for all. And indeed, a city could, in theory, buy into the Medicare program and say, we want that for everybody, not at 65, but lifelong, cradle to grave, all taken care of, no more worries. Longevity is necessary for a labor force that can compete with these huge powers like China and the European Union. But in particular, on this program point, let's just take a look. I have here the 24 promises to New Yorkers. This is came out in late May, I think. And here we have point 14 on the Credico program, make health insurance free. Yes, free for all New Yorkers. The way London, Paris, Rome, Berlin, Copenhagen, Madrid, and every other civilized city makes it free to their citizens. Of course, some of those are national programs, but you live in those places, you're not going to be left destitute or dying if you get some medical condition. So, New York, greatest city in the world, you better get single payer, Medicare for all, health care, and Credico has promised that. And the difference is he means it. For Wiener, it just shows how desperate Wiener is. Now, switching gears back again to the Middle East, let's just point out the calls to intervene on the side of the death squads, now loud at the moment. This is undercut. In the New York Times itself today, we have American tells of Odyssey as prisoner of Syrian rebels. Matthew Schreier. He was an American photographer held in a rebel prison. He fell into the hands of the death squads, the Nusra. He and a fellow prisoner had been caught trying to gouge themselves out of a wooden cell. They gave him 115 lashes on his feet with a metal cable. They bait him, Guantanamo, and all this other stuff. They torture him. And the idea, of course, is this is what you want to intervene to support. Remember the guy who cut out the heart of his dead opponent, a prisoner of war? He murdered a prisoner of war, cut his heart out, and started chewing on it in front of a video camera. And, of course, the record of the rebels in using chemical weapons is overwhelming. So I think there's absolute moral turpitude and depravity and degeneracy to do anything like this. But the only way it gets stopped is if you go out and mobilize politically Twitter is always there, and if you're not doing that, I really think you have to search your conscience, right? You are commanded to do good, and you better get out and do some. Now, let's leave Syria for the moment and take a quick look at the Egyptian situation. Here, I think it's clear now that the Egyptian army, by preempting the Moslem Brotherhood coup, in other words, there was a coup combined with wars, Ethiopia war, Syria war, possibly two wars, but the Ikhwan, the Moslem Brotherhood in Syria, and its president, Morsi, and this guy, Badi, Badi of the Moslem Brotherhood, who's now been arrested. Morsi and Badi were obviously planning a dictatorial coup with foreign wars as May and June went on. And the fact that General Sisi could see this coming and acted decisively to prevent it and to break the back of the coup with his own counter-coup has put the Moslem Brotherhood in a very difficult situation. So we've got articles here. The Washington Post, which I don't think has any particular reason to lie about this, here on Wednesday, August 21st already, Islamist group in disarray in Egypt. It's a critical moment. Their chain of command has been disrupted. They're hierarchical. They don't have, autonomous units that can decide anything on their own, so they tend to be paralyzed. But the argument that the Washington Post is trying to use this, I think, recognizing the reality that the Muslim Brotherhood has been cut down to size, very, very strongly. They want to start blaming General Sisi for Muslim Brotherhood terrorism that may emerge now. This is similar to what they do in Syria, right? They say, well, Assad, you resisted the terrorists, therefore you're responsible when they become more radical. The government is battling, the movement is battling a level of popular hostility which is unprecedented in its history. Right? This is an important argument also, that what Sadat and Mubarak did over 40 or 50 years, and Nasser over many, many decades, they were unable to weaken the Muslim Brotherhood to the point that they have been weakened by just 1 year of the exercise of power, which they tried to make into absolute power. So the thesis of this article underlying all that, though, is that the Muslim Brotherhood is being driven to violence by General Sisi. In other words, some of this is his fault. A couple of interesting quotes. Muslim Brotherhood is a shadow state. It has charitable services, mental clinics, thrift shops. Right? This is typical Hamas. It is the mother of all Islamist movements. It is. They all, this is the Al-Bannas starting in the 1920s. We're told that the grandson of the Al-Banna, who founded this in the late 1920s, British intelligence in India, has been killed. And I'm just wondering, where does that guy stand compared to Sabri al-Banna? Because the son of the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, as I understand it, is the infamous Abu Nidal, the terrorist. A terrorist, of course, with Mossad representation on his central committee. So Sabri al-Banna, is that the uncle of the al-Banna who has now been killed? We'll look into it. But you see these connections. Anyway, the idea is there's disdain from a broad swath of society. Egyptians are irate. There's tremendous hatred against the Muslim Brotherhood. That's an important political fact. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We're looking at the decline, the partial collapse of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, the infamous Ikhwan, this machine that was so focused on power that when they got into power, they somehow seemed to think that it was all about power. And what they neglected, eudaimonic legitimation. Remember, there are different kinds of legitimacy. There's a formal legitimacy. If you look at Egypt, I would say really nobody had formal legitimacy, because even though Morsi was elected in a two-round election, he won the first. Well, he won the first round, and then he won the second round, and he finally got an absolute majority in the second round. He then, in November, December, went on and essentially unilaterally amended the Constitution, giving himself total power and immunity to judicial review. So if you want to think about formal legitimacy, he surrendered it. He tossed it out the window when he went ahead and unilaterally expanded his own power. You don't get to give yourself more power. You don't get to change the Constitution once you've been elected. That's the mark of a coup d'etat. So Morsi was a creeping coup. The other thing, of course, as some have pointed out, one of the measures of democracy is, are the rights of the minority assured? And the answer in Egypt is no, no, no. The Copts were being beat up, burned out, and so forth by the Moslem Brotherhood. So this was no formal legitimacy. The legitimacy that is now available to General Sisi, and I urge him to act expeditiously to do this, is eudaimonic legitimation. Can you deliver the goods, the general welfare? It is the responsibility of governments to promote the economic progress and the prosperity of their peoples, their longevity, their full employment, their housing, their benefits, their sense of security in old age. In other words, take yourself the Roosevelt Economic Bill of Rights of January 1944. Indeed, take the Hamdin Sabahi Economic Bill of Rights that he proposed for Egypt and implement that. The problem is, if you want to do that, you've got to radically increase production. Economics is not about money. Economics is about production, production, production. The Second Nile to increase agricultural production. The Cairo to Cape Railway to increase trade and production. 4 million housing units. Try for 5 million jobs in the next 6 months. Seize the central bank. Start putting out billions and trillions of Egyptian pounds as 0% long-term credit. Turn, above all, to the BRICS Bank. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa have a vital interest in proposing and in establishing on the world stage an alternative to the bankrupt and unjust International Monetary Fund and World Bank. That is the BRICS Bank, and this is now Egypt. This is where you have to do it, right? As the Romans would say, hic Rhodus, hic salta. Here we are. Jump now. Do it. Get it done. Going back to this question of the Muslim Brotherhood, they ran on Sharia law. Now, here's the thing. As the Washington Post correctly points out, they quote a cab driver saying, I wanted Sharia law, but to him, Sharia law means economic justice. It means an orderly and just society without corruption, rip-offs, and so forth. And he says, the only thing I got was more injustice. In other words, the promise was, we will raise the standard of living of poor workers and poor peasants. They did not deliver jobs or social justice. They proved to be completely inept, bungling, impotent to provide jobs for a swelling population. That is what toppled Mubarak. You cannot get tens of millions of people in motion on internet freedom in a country like Egypt, where 30 or 40 million live on less than $2 a day. That is a petty bourgeois illusion. So the golden youth of Tahrir didn't get the point. They came with utopian democratic reforms. They needed economic populist programs. And it shows this fakery done by the Muslim Brotherhood. Here's an interesting story. Abdul Qadir is a resident of Cairo, and he's interested in bettering himself economically, but then he gets sick, and he couldn't afford the cost of hospital treatment, and the price of the bus fare went up by 300%. It used to be £1. Now it's £3. That's 42 cents. It's about 7 to 1 between the pound and the dollar. So the bus fare triples. The price of gasoline, as we know from other sources, has doubled, and that's the Moslem Brotherhood. And they sell out to the International Monetary Fund. They increase the sales tax. They talk about attacking the subsidies because, of course, as the U.S. media tells us, those subsidies, of course, are unsustainable. Now, it's interesting here. Coptic Christians, Egyptians of all kinds, but Coptic Christians especially, have staged a demonstration at the Washington Post, saying the Washington Post is in the pocket of the Muslim Brotherhood. I would say you'll find things in the Egyptian political debate which would shock a politically correct left liberal Western mushhead. Here, one guy says Egypt is doing the world a favor by getting rid of those extremists, and the Washington Post should cover that story. The Washington Post says that their coverage has been fair. Anyway, that's the idea. And today's Friday. Today's the Friday of the Martyrs, but somehow it looks like the Martyrs didn't get the invitation. The Martyrs forgot to RSVP on this Friday, the 23rd of August, because according to what I've seen, right, and they're normally eager to show you any crowd with a camera angle designed to make it look big, there's nothing happening. Tahrir is a traffic circle, and these other places are whatever they were. So that's, I think, it. Oh, and of course, the one thing we should have mentioned with Syria, but it also bears on Egypt, Al Jazeera has now launched their Al Jazeera for America. Now, you notice the cable television here, the MHZ network of Gold Bane, Virginia, in the recent past would give you Al Jazeera International Edition. All British, all hate the U.S. for all the wrong reasons. So a bunch of British anti-American venomous characters. Now we've got a bunch of CNN and NBC retreads as Al Jazeera for the United States. And I'm wondering, are we going to get Qaradawi? Aren't they going to give Qaradawi a program? Here's what you do. You take Qaradawi, you dress him up with some suspenders so he looks like Larry King, and you give Qaradawi an hour once a week. Why not? And he can come out there and say, jihad against Syria, jihad against Egypt. He can say that the natural tendency of Islam is to ally with NATO, which he has said, and he's probably got a few jihads against the United States still hanging. I somehow don't think that Al Jazeera is going to put their man Qaradawi on the U.S. version, but that's the one they have. He's the biggest personality. He's the super Larry King of their Arabic language version. And again, he's got jihads out against Syria. Now he's got a jihad against Egypt. Isn't that great? So if you're an Egyptian, I think you probably get pretty resentful of this. Now, let's say a few things about the various whistleblowers. Bradley Manning, I think, is a victim. I think he has been betrayed by Assange and the Assange network. I would regard that guy, Adrian Lamo, as a part of the Assange network. When Bradley Manning, whatever his confusions were, came forward and said he wanted to give these secrets, he was assured that his name would remain a secret, and Lamo of the WikiLeaks organization betrayed him. That's why he is where he is. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Bradley Manning is a victim, I would say, of Assange and the WikiLeaks network. This Adrian Lamo was a fundraiser and contributor to WikiLeaks. And I think whatever we can say about Manning, he must have thought that Lamo was somehow a part of the operation, WikiLeaks, and that the guarantee of anonymity would extend to him as well. And then Lamo turned around and betrayed him to the U.S. authorities. So I think this is a tragic case. And obviously the years of solitary confinement and other cruel and unusual punishments are very bad precedent. So this victim should be given his freedom. Now, here's the problem. We have this guy, John Young of Cryptome, right? Cryptome, a group which is very skeptical about Assange and WikiLeaks because they know them so well, right? John Young was the mentor of WikiLeaks, of Assange. John Young has given an interview to the Boiling Frogs over there and essentially confirms everything I've said about it, although he doesn't say limited hangout for some reason. He says they reveal a little bit, but they want to cover up most of the rest. Well, that's what a limited hangout is, and he says the operation is orchestrated. However, his approach, technically correct, lacks a polemical edge. However, I would now, based on Young and other interesting things that we've seen, I would now propose some revised criteria on the limited hangout issue. And it would go like this, right? Before, and if those of you who have followed this have heard it, right? The way you can tell a limited hangout is that the leaker becomes an instant media darling, Ellsberg, Assange, that nothing new is contained in the revelations. Young also confirms that nothing new was in there compared to what we knew in the late 1990s. In other words, compared to what we knew when the European Union held the Echelon investigations. Nothing is new. All that's new is, and this is Madsen essentially saying PRISM and this X keystroke and so forth. Those are the couple of code names that you might not have known, and of course that the main covert operations of the age, the Kennedy assassination, the so-called Arab Spring, 9/11. There's nothing about any of the big stuff, right? It's all trivial. It's all sanitized, and that they're preparing other covert operations. I would just add to this one more. The chosen vehicle, the Ellsberg, the Assange, the Snowden, becomes an instant media darling. And other whistleblowers who may be more authentic, who are seeking the attention of journalists, who are seeking to get published, are ignored. So you can have all kinds of shocking stuff published on some websites, but that's ignored until you get the great Snowden or the great Assange coming forward in close cooperation with consortia in each case of these press. The other thing, of course, that they point out that John Young wants you to remember is as I've stressed here, of course, the documents are being withheld. Snowden gave a trove of documents to Greenwald, and Greenwald is hoarding them. That's his stock in trade now. So this is the Craven media. Sure, Craven. Greenwald is hoarding this stuff, and he can now dribble it out in a kind of soap opera situation now that his boyfriend was arrested by the British and held by the British, and of course that's bad. We don't want international travelers, God knows, to be harassed. So it's a limited hangout. These things have been around. It's important, I think, also to take a look at this woman, Laura Poitras, Poitras, and see what's going on there. Also out of this is the suggestion that some attacks attributed to China that hit the U.S. may be NSA attacks that are bounced off China, right, that involve taking control of a computer in China and then coming back, a spoof, as it might be called. Okay, so there's all that. Now, there is this council of advisors. Obama has a council of advisors, people that are going to they're going to supervise the amount of snooping that goes on. And let's see if we can find this array. The most interesting is Cass Sunstein. Cass Sunstein, the master of cognitive infiltration, the husband of Samantha Power, who is leading the charge for war, at the United Nations. Cass Sunstein is going to be there. Michael Morell of the CIA is also going to be on this commish. So essentially the foxes and worse are guarding the chicken coop. Let's see who we have. Michael Morell has been acting head of the CIA at different times. One-time economic policy advisor Peter Swire, Obama's former regulatory czar or information czar, Cass Sunstein, and Richard Clarke. This is Richard A. Clarke. This is the guy who walked into the White House on the morning of 9/11 and started saying Al-Qaeda, 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 bin Laden, bin Laden, bin Laden, on the basis of absolutely nothing. Clarke is the guy who ran the U.S. government on 9/11. Read all about it in 9/11 Synthetic Terror Made in USA. It was his leaking to CBS News and CNN that got the networks going with Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda, bin Laden, bin Laden. So in many ways, Clarke is the architect of the 9/11 myth. But don't tell that to some stupid leftist, because all they remember is that he got to the hearings on Capitol Hill and he had some bad things to say about Bush. So that is going on. Now, cognitive infiltration. That's what we can expect from Cass Sunstein. And remember that cognitive infiltration goes on and on. 9/11 Truth Movement largely destroyed by cognitive infiltration. But now my thesis is that these whistleblowers and their ilk, this is cognitive infiltration. In other words, you've got a mass of people who have become disaffected with Obama. And the question now is, where will they go? They're unlikely to go to the Republican Party. Some of them, the more degraded ones, the ones with greater hebetude, we might say, they might incline towards Rand Paul or something like this. But this, I think, is a smaller group. These people are up for grabs, and the point is, how can you neutralize them? How can you stupefy them with mind control, MK, operations? That's what this is. So Psywar. And that is offering them Snowden and indeed Bradley Manning as ego identifications or object of cathexis. They want to invade your psyche, and they want to convince you that these people should be your heroes. Assange is already a disturbed personality. Manning, obviously, a deeply troubled personality. Ellsberg, obviously, a very fishy character in his own right. And therefore, I would urge you to realize they are trying to capture your imagination. They're trying to make you think that that's somehow the mode of political action. Of course, since you can't do it, you're not a government official, you don't have access to those secrets, that somehow you come out and be a cheerleader for them. All right, we've reached the end of our broadcast. I wanted to do the Gordon pessimism and the Harold Meyerson low-wage story. Let me just say one thing. If you're anywhere near the Washington, D.C. area, on Tuesday, September 24th, the anniversary of the arrival of the Russian fleet in New York City, save the date. Save the date here in Washington. In the evening of September 24th, Tuesday, we will have a suitable commemoration, discussion, and evening that will be very enlightening. Save the date. I'll tell you exactly where when we nail it down a little bit further. So this is Tarpley, and we'll be back next week on World Crisis Radio. Just backward-looking. This is very, very current because Conyers is the sponsor of H.R. 1000. This is a bill which gives a 0.25% Wall Street sales tax on stock transactions, a 2/100th, so 1/50th of 1% on the derivatives tax, and this money goes into two trust funds, one for jobs, one for job training, and it is targeted at people who need to develop skills and need to be included in the labor force, Indian reservations, inner city, unemployed, but also municipal workers and others. It is altogether a very positive step in the right direction along the road to the Wall Street sales tax. So we're for it. Again, let us not make the perfect the enemy of the good. Here's something good. Perfect is a 1% across-the-board Wall Street sales tax divided between the feds and the states. This clearly goes in that direction, and if you're not a sectarian, you've got to be in favor of what goes in the right direction, as long as it embodies the principle in a visible form, which in this case it does. It taxes Wall Street turnover. Once that's enacted, then obviously people will look at that flow and say, why are we only taking 1/4 of 1% when the average person is paying 7, 8, 9% sales tax? So there we go. On the Mall, 9:30 a.m. For the Martin Luther King commemoration. Now, the danger of war here in the short term. This is the big issue today. So we're calling on people to mobilize. If you're coming to the mall today, bring your hand. Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. And this is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. Now, we're broadcasting on the 24th is the first day this program is going to be heard, but we're taping it on Friday, August 23rd, in the midst of confused alarms of impending war. So as usual, it's time to mobilize, and the vehicle is clear. We're going to be at the mall tomorrow, many of us, for the anniversary of the Martin Luther King I Have a Dream March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And that was, of course, in 1963. This is the approximate anniversary. There's the march today, tomorrow, that is Saturday, the 24th of August. But there's also one then on the following Wednesday, I think the 28th, which is the actual calendar day-to-day anniversary. So the United Front Against Austerity hereby invites all members, friends, persons of goodwill to assemble on the Mall at about 9 to 9:30 a.m. at the Smithsonian. It's right by the Smithsonian Castle, the Smithsonian Metro stop. And this would be at 9 o'clock, 9:30 in the morning. And we're there for the event sponsored by Congressman John Conyers, in many ways the dean of the Black Caucus, someone who has been serving the Detroit area in Congress, fighting the good fight since 1964 when he was elected and 1965 when he was sworn in. And this is more than jibbles or of, the Neue Weltbühne of Willy Münzenberg, other propagandists. We're in the land of activists say, and that means Western intelligence agencies have invented. CIA Langley, speaking through some useful idiot, says. That's what this comes down to. So we don't know anything, but what we do know is that the warmonger crowd is in high dudgeon. They seem to think that this is their last chance, and they may be right. This may be it before the end of the military campaigning season and the definitive collapse, weakening, marginalization of the death squads. So the source is only the opposition. Obama has given an interview to CNN. And in this, again, he's conflicted. And again, he better stay that way. He says this is a big event of grave concern that requires the attention of the United States and of the international community. It probably requires action by the United Nations. Now, of course, that means UN action means exactly what you will not get as long as Russia and China hang tough and stick to their principled positions and don't throw their own vital interests away. Then there will be no UN action on this. Obama says the time frame for action is growing short. This is action on Syria is growing short. He wants the United Nations to investigate it, but he stresses that the United States cannot do this alone, and it's time for the UN Security Council to do something. He talks about the need to think before you strike, think before you attack. All in all, not a warlike statement. In other words, it's somewhat lukewarm. It has dangerous elements in it, to be sure, but the overall tenor of this indicates that there's plenty of room to mobilize. In other words, if you think that this decision to attack Syria has already been made, yes, again, it has not been. So get out there and don't complain later. If you get into a war with Syria and a world war, which is the likely result, or if you care about some country in the region, a lot of them are going to go down, then you better do something about this. You better get on Twitter. You better get the proverbial horn and get your congressman and tell them, no, no, no. We'll talk about the broad opposition to this in just a minute. Now, even more important in some ways is the letter we have here from General Dempsey responding to a warmonger call from one of the congressional warmongers, Eliot Engel, and we'll get to that in just a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Time to mobilize, hands off Syria, no war. And you can throw yourself into this with some idea that there is a possibility, I think, of heading this off. Obama says you don't just jump in, you have to think before you attack. So for the moment, there's no attack. There's supposed to be an investigation. Now, let's look at this other document. General Martin Dempsey, head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in the process of getting a second two-year term. Letter to Representative Eliot Engel. Engel, a leftist warmonger. This is someone obviously very concerned about Israel and so forth. So he wants an attack. Dempsey, who I regard as Obama's general at this point, he's tied his fortunes to Obama. If Obama goes down, so will Dempsey. Hands off Syria. Don't attack. And we want to give friendly advice to Obama right at the very beginning. Dear Obama, you seem conflicted. You better stay conflicted, because if you go for this project, you will be impeached. The same McCain who demands an attack will vote to impeach you, and you'll see it if you go down this road. And the Republicans, the national security warmonger Republicans, the duck and cover style Republicans, Duncan Hunter of the military budget out there in California, those guys, they will impeach you if you destroy your base. Remember that the Republicans have learned something. They realized that if they had waited to impeach Clinton until after the bombing of Yugoslavia, that they might well have been able to do it, because he alienated his base, turned them off, cooled them down to a significant degree. So they don't want to try to impeach Obama yet if they think they can destroy his base and then turn around and impeach him. So the only appeal to Obama that has traction, I know, is his self-interest, not national self-interest, not humanity, none of this. Forget about that with Obama. But Obama, it's bad for you. It's bad for your tenure in office. You will be impeached if you do this. I guarantee you. There's nothing I can do, but the people who can do it will do it to you. Now, here's what we have. On Wednesday morning, if you woke up listening to National Pentagon Radio, you heard the first item was big gas attack in Syria, big sarin gas attack in the suburbs of Damascus. These are the eastern suburbs of Damascus. It's a place called Ghut. And the source of this, there's only one source. Activists say. Activists say. We're in the land, not of Dr.